Another question, did Jenison have any manufacturing businesses? Well, that depends on what you call manufacturing, because in fact, the first industry was lumber. And there were a number of sawmills, only a few of them have photographs. This one was the Jenison mill, and the Jenison boys actually bought this from Ketchum, who had built it, and another small one. The smaller mill was torn down to become the grist mill, but this one along River Avenue continued for some time, cutting the big logs. They were taken up the ramp, and the cutting was done up above. The saw dust would come down, and boards would get piled up for drying. Here's another two sawmills out in the Shack Huddle area, southern Georgetown. And this one was around the curve north Georgetown, and it was known as Hare's Landing. This is a painting done by John Hare's son from memory in around 1880s, and it's still around. The painting lives at the museum in Grand Rapids, and this photograph doesn't do justice to it. It's very bright. You can see the big house and a number of outbuildings and the sawmill here along the river. And to make things even more congested, he put in two riverboats, the L. Jenison and the Daniel Ball, and both of them were active on the river as sidewheelers.
And yes, the Ball is part of the John Ball family of the zoo fame.
That's right. And John Ball also owned and lumbered from Glendon Landing, just around the corner, almost to the college. There were three farms that bottled milk, which you want to start with the Blissfelt?
Blissfelt Farm was one of the first ones to go in existence. This was owned by Mr. Ben Hanchett. It started out in the late 1890s, bottling milk, and Mr. Hanchett at the time lived by Fisk Lake, and so most of the milk that was bottled here on farm went to the area around Fisk Lake, Blodgett Hospital, some of the other people around there. But this was the first one, and basically this was the farm that was in existence the longest of any of the three farms, although it did not bottle milk on the farm much after the 1920s. But you can see the bottling area right there. This was Mr. Hanchett's show place. Everything in here, of course he had the money to back it up, but everything in here was Class A, #1. Everything in here was, because he would take folks out on the weekend in his special rail car, which I don't know if we get into that later on, but he had his own special car on the Interurban that would take him and his friends out to this farm where he could show them around and brag about his fancy, because all the cows were registered Holsteins, all the horses he had working on the farm were registered Belgium, so everything was top notch.
I think even the hired hands lived
The hired hands lived right there in the barn, and in the 1890s, because the Interurban ran through there off electricity, these guys had electricity up there. They had hot and cold running water because the creamery or the bottling facility needed steam. They had indoor plumbing, whatever they could want. Across the street they had the big farmhouse where they had a couple gals that stayed. They would prepare the meals for these guys and wash their uniforms. In those days, those guys all wore white uniforms that worked in the dairy. And we don't have pictures of them, but we do have pictures of the Wallen dairy guys, and you can see they were all in white uniforms also.
And this was the Wallen property?
That was the Wallen property that started basically in the late teens, early 20s it started, and they were, I think that would have been the first business of the three big farms that went out of business, out of the bottling business.
And this is 10th Avenue, and this house yet today in 2019 is still standing.
It's vacant now, so we don't know how much longer it's going to be there. But
And this photograph is taken from their barn looking down.
Probably from the top of the silo.
And this was the bottling plant itself. And then the Cedar Crest Dairy.
Cedar Crest Dairy, the name is still around. It was sold by the Lowing family, but this is run, basically started bottling on farm by Hugh Lowing, but this was originally the Lowing family. And the name is still around. It was bought out, I think, by Berrimans out of Holland, but anyway, the name is still around, but they are no longer bottling their own milk.
And this was on Bower Road.
Our and 24th.
Yeah. And today, yet on Bower Road is a remnant of all of that, and that is the Holstein cow
One
on
of
the
Jenison's
roof.
historical landmarks.
It's become a
Everybody-
local landmark.
Everybody in Jenison knows where this is.
Yes, and the story there is that when Hugh, who not only bottled but he also delivered milk, when he decided to retire, he went away to Florida for a trip, he and his wife, and his kids decided they would put this big cow on the roof. When he got back, he liked it, and so he kept it up there, and it's still there today because a long descendant is living in the house now, so that tradition continues. So the mill itself, inside here you can see Mrs. Tiffany at the box that contained the two grindstones, millstones, and this is the machinery to turn that so that the the wheat would be ground into the rough flour. To get the fine flour, they did have grinding machines as well. Here you can see the well and the water coming out of it along with the scale.
The scale. Because that's the only way that they would know what to charge the farmers. The farmers would weigh their grain when they came, and then the mill would know what to charge them for grinding services.
And the upper stories were actually storage rooms, I'm told.
That's where the grain bins were, because, you know, they as far as I know, I went there with my dad when we used to get grain ground for the farm. I think it was up till 1953, but I'm not positive that, but it was in the early 50s. But anyway, they would make sure that the grain didn't get, you know, if you brought corn in, you didn't want to get somebody else's oats. So, you know, that's where they had the different bins up there, and they would shoot it down. And when you brought your feed there, like I said, you would weigh it before you got there, and you might not necessarily get your own corn back. What they would do is, okay, you need 500 pounds of corn. They'd put it up in the thing, and when they came down, when they got 500 pounds, that was your corn, but not necessarily the corn that you brought. So.
And because of the extra stories, I think that illustrates why they're called elevators.
Elevators, because they elevated it up to the top and it free flowed down when they needed it.
Right. There was a trap door apparently on the porch, and the farmers could put their grain there.
There was a trap door right there.
And little cups would bring it to the top, and then it could be directed wherever they would want it to go. Out in the field, here's an early photograph of, I think this was out on the McCoy farm, of bringing in the grain.
Sheaves.
And when it was time for harvest time, it became a community event in a sense, or neighbors all would come, and many hands made light work. And you can see the belt is hooked up to this tractor. Wasn't it your grandfather?
That was my grandfather, that idiot standing on the top of the thrash machine
This
there.
fellow right here.
That is my grandfather. A place where nobody should be when this thing is in operation. But he was kind of a little bit wild and crazy in his younger days.
So these would either be fired by wood.
Usually wood.
Okay, but later some of the tractors became oil burners. But here's that pile that came off of the wagon. Then it would be pitchforked into the thrasher that would separate the seeds from the shaft. And then there's the horse, and the kids are here to move the bags as the grain came out.
The littler kids, their job was, they had a man that was a chute that came down into a Y, and there was two bags on the end of this Y. And when the older fella or the older kid or the farmer or some older person would take one bag off, it was the job of the little smaller kids to put an empty bag on where he'd taken the full bag off. And you better be on the ball because that rain kept coming. No monkeying around.
If you want to watch this in action today out in Allendale at their steam show, they do have a thrashing machine there, and they spend time showing everyone how that actually works. Muck farming. And the muck was basically a swamp. Up until the Dutchmen arrived, but the Dutchmen from the Netherlands knew all about farming the wetlands, and they, with ditches, were able to drop the water table down to a point where the black fertile soil was could be used for farming. And here you have celery. They also raised radishes and a lot of onions. And lettuce from time to time, and carrots. All of those garden crops could be grown and then taken. Today we'd call them truck farms. But take the produce by wagon into Grand Rapids to be able to sell. And it was a wonderful way to use up the land that had been going to waste.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, the picture in the upper right shows these fellows out in the fields banking the celery. What we used to call banking the celery. And what they would do is they would put the muck up along the side and almost cover that up. And I remember seeing the farmers going out in the middle of winter and uncovering this, and it was just as fresh as it was when they harvested, in the late fall.
Like a natural
refrigerator. Right.
Yes. So this is one of the farms, the Westrate Farm, which was right at the end of 20th Avenue. And the house is still there. Some of the outbuildings have gone now. And actually, the next farm up, the Visser Farm, I think they're still using all of that muckland for growing.
Case Visser lived up there.
Now we go to the church. And the reason this is an early picture of First Church with, I believe this would be Lucius and Lumen, who gave the property and the materials to build the church. But the reason we include this picture is because here's an interesting smokestack. And it turns out that this was also an early manufacturing endeavor by Lumen, who created a gate factory, it was called, not farm gates or garden gates, but railroad gates. Railroad gates, the crossbucks that drop down, and they would manufacture those.
There was a foundry there that manufactured the weight, the ballast, so to speak, on the end by the post, because they were run basically by gravity, and they'd move that post around. And the big weight would bring it up, and then they would counterbalance it to drop it down. But anyway, the foundry was the one that made these big hunks of iron.
And the only real evidence of this is this photograph with the smokestack still visible. But then there would have also been a large building there to house all